Welcome to Sleepless History, where we explore the past in the most soothing way possible. I'm your host, and tonight we're embarking on a journey through 11 centuries of Byzantine history. Get comfortable and let's get into the story of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, a civilization that lasted over 1,100 years. A bridge between the ancient and medieval worlds. Tonight, we'll trace its path from the founding of Constantinople in 330 AD to the final fall in 1453. Don't worry about remembering every detail. Just let the rhythm of history guide you toward rest. Chapter 1. The Founding, Constantine, and the New Rome. Our story begins not with an ending, but with a transformation. The Roman Empire, that great power that had dominated the Mediterranean world for centuries, stood at a crossroads in the early 4th century AD. The Emperor Diocletian had divided the empire into eastern and western halves, each with its own Augustus and Caesar, in an attempt to manage the vast territories more efficiently. This was the Tetrarchy, the rule of four, established around 284 AD. But it was Constantine I, who would make the decision that changed everything. Born around 280 AD in what is now Serbia, Constantine rose through the ranks of Roman military and political life during a time of great upheaval. In 312, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine defeated his rival Maxentius and became the dominant force in the western half of the empire. According to legend, before the battle, Constantine saw a vision of the cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Whether this vision was real or later propaganda, Constantine's conversion to Christianity would reshape the empire forever. By 324, Constantine had defeated Licinius, his rival in the east, and became sole emperor of the reunified Roman Empire. Now came his most momentous decision. The ancient city of Rome, with its pagan traditions and sprawling senatorial aristocracy, no longer seemed the ideal capital for his Christian empire. Constantine needed a new centre, a city that could serve as both a strategic military hub and a symbol of the new Christian Roman order. He chose Byzantium. This ancient Greek colony, founded in the 7th century BC, sat on a peninsula between the Golden Horn and the Sea of Marmara, controlling the vital straits between Europe and Asia. The location was perfect. It could be defended easily by land and sea. It controlled trade routes between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. It was closer to the wealthy eastern provinces and the Persian frontier than Rome ever was. On November 11th, 324, Constantine began the transformation of Byzantium into his new Rome. The construction took 6 years. Constantine expanded the city walls, built magnificent churches, including the first Hagia Sophia, constructed a great palace, a hippodrome for chariot races, forums, and bathhouses. He brought relics and artwork from across the empire. He encouraged senators and aristocrats to build homes there, offering them palaces as grand as those in Rome. On May 11th, 330, the city was officially dedicated. Though Constantine called it New Rome, it quickly became known by another name, Constantinople, the city of Constantine. It would remain the heart of an empire for over 1100 years. The early decades in Constantinople established patterns that would define Byzantine civilization. Constantine continued to solidify Christianity's position as the empire's dominant religion, though pagan practices persisted for generations. He convened the Council of Nicaea in 325, attempting to resolve theological disputes about the nature of Christ. This council produced the Nicene Creed, still recited in churches today. Constantine died in 337, baptized on his deathbed. His empire was divided among his three sons, Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans. As so often happened in Roman history, this division led to conflict. By 350, Constantius II had emerged as sole emperor after his brothers died in battle and political intrigue. The 4th century saw the Roman Empire, both east and west, struggling with external pressures and internal transformations. Germanic tribes pressed on the northern frontiers. The Sasanian Persian Empire threatened from the east. Christianity continued to spread and evolve, with theological debates sometimes turning violent. The Emperor Julian, ruling from 361 to 363, briefly attempted to restore paganism, earning him the epithet the apostate from Christian chroniclers. His death in battle against the Persians ended this revival. The late 4th century brought crisis. In 378, at the Battle of Adrianople, Gothic warriors defeated a Roman army and killed the Emperor Valens. This shocking defeat demonstrated that Rome's military supremacy was no longer absolute. The Goths, refugees from Hun attacks, had been allowed to settle within Roman borders, but poor treatment by corrupt officials led to rebellion. The Battle of Adrianople marked a turning point. Never again would Rome treat Germanic peoples with quite the same casual dismissiveness. Theodosius I, emperor from 379 to 395, managed to stabilize the situation by making peace with the Goths and recruiting them into the Roman army. He also made Christianity the official state religion in 380, banning pagan worship. When Theodosius died in 395, he divided the empire between his two sons. Arcadius received the east with Constantinople as his capital, while Honorius received the west with Milan and later Ravenna as capitals. Though this division was intended to be administrative rather than permanent, it marked the beginning of the true split between East and West. The 5th century would prove this split decisive. While the Western Empire crumbled under barbarian invasions, losing Rome itself to the Visigoths in 410 and to the Vandals in 455, the Eastern Empire endured. Protected by Constantinople's magnificent walls, enriched by the prosperous eastern provinces of Egypt, Syria, and Asia Minor, the Eastern emperors watched their Western counterparts fade into insignificance. In 476, the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. The Western Empire was over. But in Constantinople, the Emperor Zeno continued to rule, seeing himself as emperor of all Romans, east and west. The fiction that the empire remained unified would persist in Byzantine ideology for centuries, long after it bore any resemblance to reality. Chapter 2. The Age of Justinian and Theodora. Let us move forward now into the 6th century, to the reign that would define Byzantine ambitions for generations to come. The Emperor Justinian I, who ruled from 527 to 565, had a vision to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory, to reconquer the lost western provinces, to create a unified Christian empire under Roman law. But before we discuss Justinian's conquests, we must speak of the woman who ruled beside him. Theodora, born around 500 AD, rose from humble origins as an actress, a profession considered disreputable in Roman society. The exact details of her early life are murky, complicated by hostile accounts from the historian Procopius, who wrote scandalous stories about her in his Secret History. What we know with certainty is that she married Justinian before he became emperor, and when he ascended the throne in 527, she became empress. Theodora was no mere consort. She advised Justinian on policy, received foreign envoys, corresponded with foreign leaders, and influenced appointments. Her finest hour came during the Nika riots of 532, when we'll turn our attention shortly. Justinian himself came from peasant stock in what is now North Macedonia. His uncle Justin, an illiterate soldier who had risen to become emperor, adopted Justinian and ensured his education. When Justin died in 527, Justinian succeeded him peacefully. The new emperor was intelligent, energetic, and deeply religious. He worked long hours, often through the night, earning him the nickname the Emperor Who Never Sleeps. One of Justinian's first major projects was legal reform. The Roman legal tradition stretched back centuries, an accumulation of laws, edicts, and judicial decisions that had become unwieldy and sometimes contradictory. Justinian appointed a commission headed by the jurist Tribonian to organize and codify Roman law. The result was the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law, completed between 529 and 534. This massive work consisted of 4 parts: the Codex, a collection of imperial constitutions and laws; the Digest, a compilation of writings by Roman jurists; the Institutes, a textbook for law students; and the Novellae, new laws issued by Justinian himself. This codification preserved Roman legal principles and would influence European law for over a millennium. Even today, many modern legal systems trace elements back to Justinian's code, but Justinian's reign nearly ended before his grand projects could be completed. In January of 532, during chariot races at the Hippodrome, riots broke out that would threaten the very survival of his government. Constantinople's population was divided into factions supporting different chariot racing teams, the Blues and the Greens. These factions were more than sports clubs. They represented political and religious allegiances and could mobilize thousands of supporters. On January 13th, members of both factions united against Justinian's government, chanting Nika, meaning conquer or victory. The Nika riots raged for 5 days. Rioters burned buildings across Constantinople, including the original Hagia Sophia. They proclaimed a rival emperor. Justinian's advisors urged him to flee the city. According to the historian Procopius, it was Theodora who stiffened Justinian's resolve. In a speech to the frightened council, she reportedly declared that purple, the imperial colour, made a fine burial shroud, and that she would rather die as empress than live as a fugitive. Whether these were her exact words or not, Justinian stayed. He ordered his generals Belisarius and Mundus to attack the rioters trapped in the Hippodrome. The soldiers massacred thousands. Estimates range from 30,000 to 50,000 people. The riots ended. Justinian's throne was secure. With his position reinforced, Justinian could pursue his greatest ambition, reconquest of the lost Western territories. The Vandal kingdom in North Africa, the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy, and the Visigothic kingdom in Spain all occupied lands that had once been Roman. Justinian saw their recovery as his divine duty. The first target was the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. The Vandals, a Germanic people, had crossed into Africa in 429 and established a kingdom centered on Carthage. They controlled the grain supplies that had once fed Rome. In 533, Justinian sent an expedition under his general Belisarius with about 15,000 men. Against the odds, Belisarius achieved stunning success. Within a year, he had defeated the Vandal armies, captured their king, and reconquered North Africa for the empire. By 534, North Africa was once again Roman. Encouraged by this success, Justinian turned to Italy, where the Ostrogoths had ruled since the late 5th century. In 535, Belisarius invaded Sicily, then crossed to the Italian mainland. The Gothic Wars would prove far more difficult than the Vandal campaign. The conflict dragged on for nearly 20 years, from 535 to 554. Belisarius captured Rome in 536, lost it, and recaptured it. The Goths rallied under capable kings like Totila. Cities changed hands multiple times. Italy was devastated. Finally, in 552, Justinian sent another general, Narses, with a large army. Narses defeated the Goths decisively at the Battle of Taginae in 552 and the Battle of Mons Lactarius in 553. By 554, Italy was nominally Roman again, though the wars had left the peninsula impoverished and depopulated. Byzantine control of Italy would last in various forms for the next 5 centuries, though it would be constantly challenged. Justinian also won back part of southern Spain from the Visigoths between 552 and 554, establishing a foothold on the Iberian Peninsula that would last until the early 7th century. These reconquests were remarkable, but came at enormous cost. The wars drained the treasury, depopulated conquered territories, and stretched the army thin. Meanwhile, the eastern frontier with Persia remained a constant concern. The Sassanid Persian Empire under Khosrow I was a formidable opponent. Wars with Persia in 540 to 545 and 557 to 562 required constant attention and resources. Justinian had to pay enormous subsidies to maintain peace on the eastern frontier so he could pursue his western ambitions. Between military campaigns, Justinian pursued an ambitious building program. His greatest architectural achievement was the new Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom. After the original church burned in the Nika riots, Justinian commissioned architects Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus to create something unprecedented. Completed in just 5 years, by 537, the Hagia Sophia featured a massive dome that seemed to float above the nave, supported by innovative pendentives. Light streamed through windows at the dome's base, creating an ethereal effect. When Justinian first entered the completed church, he he reportedly exclaimed, "Solomon, I have outdone you," referring to the legendary temple in Jerusalem. The Hagia Sophia stood as the largest cathedral in the world for nearly 1,000 years. It remains one of the great architectural achievements of human civilization. Justinian also built or rebuilt churches, monasteries, aqueducts, fortresses, and public buildings across the empire. The Basilica Cistern in Constantinople, a vast underground water reservoir supported by 336 columns, dates from Justinian's reign. Monasteries like St. Catherine's at Mount Sinai and San Vitale in Ravenna showcase Byzantine art and architecture at their height. But even as Justinian built and conquered, disaster struck. In 541, a plague reached Constantinople from Egypt. This was the first outbreak of the bubonic plague in the Mediterranean world, known to history as the Plague of Justinian. The disease, carried by fleas on rats, spread rapidly through the densely populated cities of the empire. The historian Procopius left a detailed description of the plague in Constantinople. He claimed that at its height, 10,000 people died each day in the capital, though this figure was likely an exaggeration. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Justinian himself fell ill, but recovered. The plague killed between 1/4 and 1/2 of the empire's population over the next 2 centuries as it returned in waves. The demographic catastrophe weakened the empire's military and economic strength for generations. Justinian died in November of 565 at the age of 83 or 84, having outlived Theodora by 17 years. She had died in 548, likely of cancer. Justinian never remarried. His long reign had seen spectacular achievements: the reconquest of Africa, Italy, and part of Spain, the codification of Roman law, the construction of the Hagia Sophia, and hundreds of other buildings. But it had also exhausted the empire's resources and failed to address fundamental structural problems. The reconquered territories in the west would prove difficult and expensive to hold. Chapter 3: Crisis and Survival, the 7th century. The decades following Justinian's death saw his successors struggling to maintain his legacy. His nephew, Justin II, ruled from 565 to 578, but suffered a mental breakdown under the stress of defending the empire on multiple fronts. The general Tiberius succeeded him, followed by Maurice, who ruled from 582 to 602. Maurice was a capable but stern emperor who attempted to reform the military and cut costs. He reorganized Byzantine holdings in Italy into the Exarchate of Ravenna and created the system of themes, military districts where soldier farmers held land in exchange for military service. This system would become central to Byzantine military organization. However, Maurice's attempts to economize made him unpopular with the army. In 602, during a mutiny, the soldiers proclaimed a centurion named Phocas as emperor. Phocas marched on Constantinople, where Maurice was captured, forced to watch his sons executed, and then killed himself. Phocas's reign from 602 to 610 was disastrous. Described by later chroniclers as a bloody tyrant, he faced revolts and lost territory to the Persians. In 610, Heraclius, the son of the Exarch of Africa, sailed to Constantinople with a fleet. Phocas was overthrown and executed. Heraclius became emperor, founding a dynasty that would rule for a century. Heraclius inherited an empire in crisis. The Sassanid Persians under Khosrow II had been attacking since 603, nominally avenging the murdered Maurice. By the time Heraclius took power, the Persians had conquered Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. In 614, they captured Jerusalem and carried off the true cross, the relic believed to be the cross on which Jesus was crucified. This was not merely a military defeat, but a spiritual catastrophe for Christian Byzantium. By 618, Persian armies had reached Chalcedon, directly across the Bosphorus from Constantinople. At the same time, the Avars, a nomadic people, threatened from the north. Constantinople itself seemed doomed. Heraclius reportedly considered abandoning the city and moving the capital to Carthage in North Africa. But Heraclius stayed and fought. In 622, leaving Constantinople's defence to his generals, he embarked on a daring campaign into Persian territory. Over the next 6 years, Heraclius led his armies deep into the Sassanid Empire, winning victories and recruiting allies among the Persians' enemies. The campaign resembled a crusade as much as a conventional war, with Heraclius using Christian religious imagery to inspire his troops. In 626, while Heraclius campaigned in the east, the Avars and Persians launched a coordinated attack on Constantinople. The Avars besieged the city from the land side, while a Persian army watched from Chalcedon. But Constantinople's walls held. The Byzantine navy destroyed Avar boats trying to cross the Golden Horn, and the siege failed. According to tradition, the Virgin Mary herself protected the city, appearing on the walls to rally the defenders. Heraclius pressed his advantage. In December of 627, at the Battle of Nineveh, he defeated a Persian army near the ruins of the ancient Assyrian capital. He marched toward the Sassanid capital of Ctesiphon. The Persian Empire collapsed into civil war. Khosrow II was overthrown and killed by his own son. The new Persian king, Kavad II, made peace, returning all conquered territories and the true cross. Heraclius returned to Constantinople in triumph in 628, personally restoring the true cross to Jerusalem in 630. He had saved the empire from what seemed like certain destruction. Coins and inscriptions hailed him as a new Moses or Alexander. But the victory was hollow. Both the Byzantine and Persian empires had exhausted themselves in 26 years of total war. Their armies were depleted, their treasuries empty, their provinces devastated. They had fatally weakened each other, and a new power was rising in the Arabian Peninsula. In 632, the Prophet Muhammad died in Medina, having united the Arab tribes under Islam. What followed changed the world. Arab armies, inspired by religious zeal and led by brilliant commanders, erupted from the peninsula. They defeated the Persians and Byzantines repeatedly, conquering with astonishing speed. The Byzantines, exhausted from their wars with Persia, could not stem the tide. In 636, at the Battle of Yarmouk in Syria, a Byzantine army was destroyed by Arab forces under Khalid ibn al-Walid. Syria fell. In 638, Jerusalem surrendered to the Caliph Umar. Egypt, the empire's richest province, was conquered between 639 and 642. By 650, North Africa was being lost. The Sassanid Persian Empire collapsed entirely, conquered by the Arabs between 633 and 651. In less than 20 years, the Byzantine Empire lost over half its territory and nearly 2/3 of its population. The wealthy provinces of Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, centers of Christianity for centuries, were gone. The empire's grain supply from Egypt was cut off. Tax revenues plummeted. The Mediterranean, for centuries a Roman lake, was now contested by Arab fleets. Heraclius, the once triumphant emperor, died in 641, having witnessed the loss of all he had fought to recover. His successors faced a shrinking empire under constant assault. The emperor Constans II, ruling from 641 to 668, attempted to restore imperial fortunes by personally leading campaigns in Italy and considering moving the capital to Sicily, where he eventually died, murdered in his bath. The late 7th century brought no relief. The Arabs besieged Constantinople twice, from 674 to 678, and again in 717 to 718. Both sieges failed, defeated by Constantinople's massive walls, the Byzantine navy's use of Greek fire, a secret incendiary weapon, and the determination of the defenders. These failures convinced the Arab Caliphate that Constantinople could not be taken by force. Meanwhile, the Bulgars, a Turkic people, established a kingdom south of the Danube in the 680s, creating a new threat in the Balkans. The Slavs migrated into the Balkans in large numbers, fundamentally changing the region's ethnic composition. By 700, the Byzantine Empire had been reduced to Anatolia, Armenia, parts of the Balkans, southern Italy, Sicily, and a few outposts in North Africa. The universal Roman Empire that Justinian had dreamed of restoring was gone forever. Yet, Byzantium survived. The theme system provided resilient military organization. Constantinople's location and fortifications made it nearly impregnable. The bureaucracy continued to function. The church provided spiritual unity. The empire adapted to its reduced circumstances, transforming from a Mediterranean power into a Balkan and Anatolian state. Greek replaced Latin as the official language during the 7th century, reflecting the empire's changed character. The term Byzantine Empire, though not used by contemporaries who still called themselves Romans, seems increasingly appropriate. Chapter 4: Iconoclasm and the Isaurian Dynasty. The 8th century opened with the Byzantine Empire stabilized but much reduced. The Emperor Justinian II, grandson of Heraclius, attempted to restore imperial prestige but was overthrown, mutilated, exiled, briefly restored, and finally killed in 711. A period of instability followed, with 6 emperors in 22 years. Order returned with Leo III, who seized power in 717. An experienced general from Syria, Leo faced an immediate crisis. The Arab Umayyad Caliphate, having consolidated its power, launched another massive assault on Constantinople. Arab forces besieged the city from August 717 to August 718, deploying both land armies and a large fleet. Leo organized the defense brilliantly. Greek fire destroyed much of the Arab fleet. The winter of 717 to 718 was unusually harsh, causing terrible suffering in the Arab camp. Bulgarian forces attacked the Arabs from the north. Finally, in August 718, the Arabs withdrew, having lost most of their fleet and thousands of soldiers. This marked the last Arab attempt to conquer Constantinople until the 15th century. Having saved the empire, Leo turned to religious and administrative reform. In 726 or 730, he issued an edict against the veneration of icons, religious images of Christ, Mary, and the saints. This began the Iconoclast controversy, one of the defining conflicts of Byzantine history, which would last, with interruptions, for over a century. Leo's motivations for iconoclasm remain debated. Some historians argue he was influenced by Islamic and Jewish prohibitions against graven images. Others suggest he sought to reduce the power of monasteries, which owned many icons and much land. Still, others believe he genuinely saw icon veneration as idolatry, a violation of the second commandment. Whatever his reasons, Leo ordered icons removed from churches and destroyed. Resistance was fierce. The Pope in Rome condemned iconoclasm, beginning a rift between Eastern and Western Christianity. Monasteries, centres of icon production and veneration, became focal points of opposition. Leo's son, Constantine V, who ruled from 741 to 775, pursued iconoclasm even more zealously, persecuting monks and destroying religious art. Yet Constantine V was also a successful military emperor. He campaigned effectively against the Arabs and inflicted major defeats on the Bulgars. Under his leadership, the empire's borders stabilized. The theme system matured, creating a society of soldier farmers loyal to the emperor. The economy recovered. Constantinople grew prosperous again. Constantine V's son, Leo IV, ruled briefly from 775 to 780 and continued iconoclast policies. But when Leo IV died, his wife Irene became regent for their young son, Constantine VI. Irene opposed iconoclasm. In 787, she convened the Second Council of Nicaea, which restored icon veneration. Icons returned to churches, monks were rehabilitated, iconophiles celebrated. But the controversy was far from over. Irene proved an ambitious and ruthless ruler. When her son, Constantine VI, came of age and attempted to rule independently, Irene had him arrested and blinded in 797, an act that shocked contemporaries. She ruled alone as empress until 802, when she was overthrown by officials who placed Nikephoros I on the throne. In the West, Irene's rule as empress created a legal problem that would have lasting consequences. The Franks and the papacy argued that a woman could not legitimately hold the imperial title. On Christmas Day 800, Pope Leo III crowned the Frankish king Charlemagne as Roman emperor in Rome. This created a rival emperor in the West and deepened the split between Greek East and Latin West. The Byzantines never recognized Charlemagne's imperial title, seeing it as a usurpation. Iconoclasm returned in 815 under Emperor Leo V, who reinstituted the ban on icons. This second period of iconoclasm was less severe than the first, but still caused conflict. Emperors Michael II and Theophilos maintained iconoclast policies through 842. Finally, in 843, the Empress Theodora, widow of Theophilos and regent for their son Michael III, restored icon veneration permanently. The triumph of orthodoxy, as this restoration is known, is still celebrated in Eastern Orthodox churches on the first Sunday of Lent. Icons resumed their central place in Byzantine religious life, where they remain in Orthodox tradition to this day. The Iconoclast controversy had profound effects. It deepened the theological and cultural divide between Eastern and Western Christianity. It led to the destruction of countless works of early Christian art, leaving the pre-Iconoclast period poorly represented in surviving Byzantine artwork. It strengthened imperial control over the church, while also demonstrating the limits of that control when opposed by popular piety, and it helped define Byzantine orthodoxy's distinctive character, with icons becoming one of its most recognizable features. Chapter 5. The Macedonian Dynasty and Byzantine Renaissance. The mid-9th century saw the rise of one of Byzantium's greatest dynasties. In 867, Basil, a peasant from Macedonia who had risen to become co-emperor, murdered the emperor Michael III and seized sole power. Thus began the Macedonian dynasty, which would rule the empire for nearly 200 years, from 867 to 1056. Basil I, ruling from 867 to 886, proved an effective emperor despite his brutal seizure of power. He reformed the legal code, updating Justinian's laws. He strengthened the empire's defences and began reconquering territory from the Arabs in southern Italy and Anatolia. He patronized art and architecture, beginning what historians call the Macedonian Renaissance, a flowering of Byzantine culture. Basil's son, Leo VI, called the Wise, ruled from 886 to 912. Leo was more scholar than soldier. He completed his father's legal reforms, producing the Basilica, a new law code in Greek that replaced older Latin texts. He wrote or commissioned works on military tactics, theology, and rhetoric. His reign saw continued cultural flourishing, even as military fortunes varied, but the real military revival came under Leo's successors. The Emperor Nikephoros, the second Phocas, who seized power in 963, was a brilliant general who had already reconquered Crete from the Arabs in 961. As emperor, he pushed into Syria, capturing Antioch in 969. His armies expanded Byzantine control in both east and west. Nikephoros was murdered in 969 by his nephew John Tsimiskas, who married Nikephoros' widow and became emperor. John I Tsimisces, ruling from 969 to 976, continued the conquests. He campaigned in Syria and Palestine, briefly entering Jerusalem. He fought the Rus, a confederation of Scandinavian and Slavic peoples, defeating them in Bulgaria. By the time of his death, possibly by poisoning, the empire's frontiers had expanded dramatically. The greatest emperor of the Macedonian dynasty was Basil II, who ruled from 976 to 1025, a reign of nearly 50 years. Basil came to power as a child, with regents ruling in his name. When he finally achieved real control in 985, he proved relentlessly energetic and utterly focused on military expansion and imperial power. Basil's primary objective was the conquest of Bulgaria. The Bulgarian Empire which had threatened Byzantium for centuries, controlled much of the Balkans. The Bulgarian Tsar Samuel was a formidable opponent. The war between Byzantium and Bulgaria consumed most of Basil's reign, from 986 to 1018. It was a brutal struggle, fought year after year across the mountains and valleys of the Balkans. The climax came in 1014 at the Battle of Clydian. Basil's army annihilated the Bulgarian forces, capturing thousands of soldiers. According to Byzantine sources, Basil ordered 99 out of every 100 prisoners blinded, leaving one man with one eye to lead the others home. When Tsar Samuel saw the blinded soldiers, he suffered a stroke and died 2 days later. This act of calculated cruelty earned Basil the epithet Bulgar Roktonos, the Bulgar slayer. By 1018, Bulgaria was conquered and annexed to the empire. Basil extended Byzantine control throughout the Balkans. He also campaigned successfully in the east against the Arabs, expanding the empire's eastern frontiers. By his death in 1025, the Byzantine Empire had reached its greatest territorial extent since the Arab conquests of the 7th century. It controlled the Balkans, Greece, Anatolia, parts of Syria, southern Italy, and various Mediterranean islands. Basil's reign also saw important cultural and religious developments. The Byzantine Church's influence expanded. In 988, the Rus prince Vladimir of Kiev converted to Orthodox Christianity and married Basil's sister Anna, bringing the Rus into the Byzantine cultural sphere. This conversion would have enormous long-term consequences, as the Rus principalities and later Russia saw themselves as heirs to Byzantine Orthodox civilization. During the Macedonian period, Byzantine culture flourished. This was the era of the Macedonian Renaissance, a term that might be somewhat grandiose but captures a real cultural vitality. Scholars collected and copied ancient Greek manuscripts, preserving classical texts that might otherwise have been lost. The university in Constantinople trained bureaucrats and theologians. Artists created magnificent mosaics and icons. Architects built churches that combined classical proportions with distinctly Byzantine features. The missionary saints Cyril and Methodius, who worked in the 9th century, created the Glagolitic alphabet for translating Christian texts into Slavonic languages. Their disciples developed the Cyrillic alphabet, named for Cyril, which remains in use across Eastern Europe and Russia. Byzantine missionaries spread Orthodox Christianity and Byzantine culture throughout Eastern Europe. Byzantine diplomacy during this period was sophisticated and effective. Rather than relying solely on military force, Byzantine emperors used strategic marriages, subsidies, religious conversion, and careful manipulation of barbarian tribes to maintain the empire's security. The imperial court's ceremonial and bureaucratic complexity impressed foreign visitors and reinforced Byzantine claims to universal authority. Trade flourished. Constantinople was the greatest city in Christendom, perhaps in the world, with a population estimated at several 100,000. The city's markets offered goods from across the known world: spices from India, silks from China, furs from Russia, amber from the Baltic, ivory from Africa. The Byzantine gold coin, the nomisma or solidus, was the standard currency for Mediterranean and Middle Eastern trade. Yet even at its height under Basil II, the empire faced challenges. The theme system while effective militarily, created powerful generals who could become rivals to the emperor. The growing power of aristocratic landowners threatened the soldier-farmer system. Theological disputes continued to simmer, and the Great Schism of 1054, when mutual excommunications between the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Pope in Rome formalized the split between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, would have lasting consequences. Chapter 6: Decline and the Coming of the Turks. After Basil II's death in 1025, the Macedonian dynasty continued for another generation, but the quality of emperors declined. Basil's successors were less capable, more focused on luxury and court intrigue than military affairs and administrative reform. The last Macedonian emperor, Theodora, died in 1056, ending the dynasty. The 11th century saw increasing instability. The military aristocracy and the civil bureaucracy competed for control of the state. Generals revolted regularly, sometimes successfully. The soldier-farmer system eroded as aristocrats accumulated large estates. The professional army shrank. The empire increasingly relied on foreign mercenaries, including the famed Varangian Guard, composed of Scandinavian warriors, often from among the Rus or Anglo-Saxons who fled England after the Norman conquest of 1066. In 1071, disaster struck on two fronts. In April, the last Byzantine stronghold in southern Italy, Bari, fell to the Norman adventurer Robert Guiscard. The Byzantines had held territory in Italy for over 5 centuries, a link to the old Roman Empire. Now it was gone. Far more catastrophic was the Battle of Manzikert in August 1071. The emperor Romanos IV Diogenes led a large army into eastern Anatolia to confront the Seljuk Turks, a recently arrived Turkic people who had converted to Islam and were raiding Byzantine territory. At Manzikert, near Lake Van, Romanos's army was defeated and he was captured, an unprecedented humiliation for a Byzantine emperor. The Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan treated Romanos well and released him after agreeing to terms. But when Romanos returned to Constantinople, he found he had been overthrown. Captured, blinded, and exiled, he died shortly after. The empire descended into civil war. Meanwhile, with Byzantine attention focused on internal power struggles, Turkish tribes poured into Anatolia, the empire's heartland. By 1080, they controlled most of central Anatolia. The loss of these territories was catastrophic, depriving the empire of manpower, tax revenue, and strategic depth. A capable general, Alexios Komnenos, seized power in 1081, founding the Komnenian dynasty. Alexios I faced a nearly impossible situation. The Normans threatened from the west, the Turks from the east, and nomadic Pechenegs from the north. The treasury was empty, the army was weak. The empire seemed on the verge of collapse. Alexios proved a skilled diplomat and strategist. He made alliances with Venice and other Italian city-states, granting them trade privileges in exchange for naval support. He played various enemies against each other. He reformed the army and administration. Slowly, he stabilized the situation. In 1095, Alexios sent envoys to Pope Urban II, requesting Western mercenaries to help fight the Turks. Urban's response went far beyond what Alexios expected. At the Council of Clermont in 1095, Urban called for a crusade to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim rule. Tens of thousands of Western Europeans took up the cross. The First Crusade began in 1096. Alexios expected a few thousand trained knights. Instead, waves of crusaders, including armed peasants, minor nobility, and great lords, descended on Constantinople. The Byzantines viewed the Crusaders with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Cultural and religious differences between Greek Orthodox Byzantines and Latin Catholic Westerners created friction. The Crusaders' violence and indiscipline shocked the sophisticated Byzantines. Nevertheless, the Crusades succeeded in ways that benefited Byzantium. The Crusaders, with some Byzantine assistance, defeated the Seljuk Turks in Anatolia and recaptured Nicaea in 1097. They then marched into Syria and Palestine, capturing Antioch in 1098 and Jerusalem in 1099. They established Crusader states in Antioch, Edessa, Jerusalem, and later Tripoli. The Crusades helped relieve Turkish pressure on Byzantium. Alexios and his successors, his son John II Komnenos and grandson Manuel I Komnenos, managed to reclaim substantial territories in western Anatolia and expand Byzantine influence in the Balkans. John II, ruling from 1118 to 1143, was particularly successful militarily, though less dramatic than his father or son. He earned respect as a just and pious emperor. Manuel I, ruling from 1143 to 1180, was ambitious and energetic. He campaigned widely from Italy to Anatolia. He attempted to reunite the Christian churches. He married twice to Western princesses. He envisioned restoring Byzantine power in the west and east simultaneously, but his ambitions exceeded his resources. His defeat at the Battle of Myriokephalon in 1176 by the Seljuk Turks demonstrated Byzantium's inability to fully restore its position in Anatolia. When Manuel died in 1180, he left the throne to his young son Alexios II. The regency was chaotic. In 1185, Andronikos I Komnenos, Manuel's cousin, seized power in a violent coup. Andronikos's brief reign from 1185 to 1185 was marked by paranoid tyranny. He executed potential rivals and terrorized the aristocracy. When Norman forces from Sicily attacked the empire, capturing Thessalonica, Andronikos's incompetent response led to his overthrow and brutal execution by a mob in Constantinople. Isaac II Angelos seized the throne in 1185, beginning the Angelos dynasty. The Angelos emperors, ruling until 1204, were generally weak and ineffective. The empire fragmented as provincial governors and generals carved out semi-independent territories. Bulgaria successfully revolted in 1186, re-establishing an independent Bulgarian state. The economy deteriorated. Italian merchants, especially Venetians, came to dominate Byzantine trade, siphoning wealth from the empire. Chapter 7. The Fourth Crusade and Latin Occupation. The events of 1204 rank among the great tragedies of Byzantine history. The Fourth Crusade, called by Pope Innocent III, was intended to attack Egypt and from there liberate Jerusalem, which had fallen back to Muslim control. But the crusade was diverted to Constantinople in a complex series of events involving Venetian commercial interests, Byzantine dynastic politics, and Crusader opportunism. In 1203, a Byzantine prince, Alexios Angelos, approached the Crusaders with an offer. His father, Isaac II, had been overthrown and blinded by his brother Alexios III in 1195. The younger Alexios promised that if the Crusaders helped restore his father to the throne, he would pay them handsomely, provide troops for their crusade, and reunite the Orthodox and Catholic churches under papal authority. The Crusaders, in debt to Venice for transport ships and unable to pay, agreed. In July 1203, the Crusader fleet arrived at Constantinople. The city's defenders were numerous but poorly led. Alexios III fled. The Crusaders restored Isaac II and crowned his son Alexios IV as co-emperor. But Alexios IV could not fulfill his promises. The Byzantine treasury could not produce the gold he had pledged. The Orthodox Church refused reunion with Rome. The population of Constantinople resented the Latin Crusaders. Tensions escalated. In February 1204, a palace coup overthrew Alexios IV and Isaac II, who were killed or died in custody. A nobleman named Alexios Doukas became emperor as Alexios V. The new emperor defied the Crusaders and strengthened Constantinople's defences. The Crusaders, feeling betrayed and seeing an opportunity for profit, decided to conquer the city for themselves. In March 1204, they agreed to divide the Byzantine Empire among themselves and the Venetians after its conquest. On April 9th, 1204, the Crusaders attacked Constantinople by sea. On April 12th, they breached the walls. On April 13th, Alexios V fled. The greatest city in Christendom fell to the Latin Crusaders. What followed was 3 days of systematic looting and destruction. The Crusaders, blessed by their priests, who declared the Greeks schismatic heretics deserving of punishment, sacked Constantinople. They stole gold, silver, precious gems, and artwork. They destroyed icons and relics. They vandalized churches, including the Hagia Sophia. They burned libraries containing irreplaceable ancient manuscripts. The damage to Byzantine civilization was incalculable. A Venetian contemporary, Geoffroy de Villehardouin, who participated in the crusade, described the vast wealth taken. The Crusaders divided their plunder according to prior agreement. Many treasures were shipped to Venice, where they can still be seen in St. Mark's Basilica. The famous bronze horses on St. Mark's were looted from Constantinople's Hippodrome. The Crusaders established the Latin Empire of Constantinople, with Count Baldwin of Flanders crowned emperor. The Byzantine Empire was partitioned. The Venetians took strategic islands and ports. Various Crusader lords received fiefs. Greek Byzantine nobles and officials fled to unconquered territories, establishing successor states. 3 main Byzantine successor states emerged. The largest was the Empire of Nicaea in northwestern Anatolia, led by Theodore I Lascaris, son-in-law of a former emperor. The Despotate of Epirus controlled northwestern Greece and part of Albania. The Empire of Trebizond, on the Black Sea coast of Anatolia, was established by grandsons of the Emperor Andronikos I. These Greek states claimed to be the legitimate continuation of the Byzantine Empire. They vied with each other and with the Latins. But Nicaea, closest to Constantinople and controlling rich territory in Anatolia, emerged as the strongest contender. The Latin Empire was never stable. The Latin emperors controlled Constantinople and its immediate environs, parts of Thrace and Greece, but faced constant challenges from the Greek states and Bulgarian attacks. The Crusader states lacked the bureaucratic sophistication, economic resources, and local support that had sustained Byzantine rule. The Empire of Nicaea, meanwhile, flourished under capable emperors. Theodora I Lascaris, ruling from 1205 to 1221, established the state on firm foundations. His successor, John III Vatatzes, ruling from 1222 to 1254, expanded Nicaean territory in both Anatolia and Europe. He was a wise and careful emperor, strengthening the economy and military while avoiding overextension. By the mid-13th century, the Latin Empire was crumbling. Theodore II Lascaris, John's son, continued the expansion but died young in 1258. A general, Michael Palaiologos, became regent for John's young son. In 1259, Michael had himself crowned co-emperor as Michael VIII. In 1261, he blinded the legitimate heir, John IV Lascaris, and became sole emperor, founding the Palaiologos dynasty, the last to rule Byzantium. On July 25, 1261, Nicaean forces under General Alexios Strategopoulos approached Constantinople and found a postern gate unguarded. They entered the city with a small force. The Latin Emperor Baldwin II fled. Constantinople returned to Greek rule after 57 years. Michael VIII entered the city on August 15th and was crowned in the Hagia Sophia. The Byzantine Empire was restored, though much reduced. It controlled Constantinople, parts of Thrace, western Anatolia, some Aegean islands, and parts of Greece. The Despotate of Epirus and the Empire of Trebizond remained independent. Much former Byzantine territory was controlled by Latin Crusader states, the Bulgarians, the Serbs, or the Turks. The empire would never recover its former extent or power. But it survived, endured, adapted. Constantinople was Byzantine again. Chapter 8. The Palaiologos dynasty and Turkish advance. Michael, the 8th Palaiologos, ruling from 1259 to 1282, spent his reign securing his restoration. He faced threats from the west, particularly Charles of Anjou, brother of the French king, who planned to recapture Constantinople. Michael countered through diplomacy, supporting the revolt known as the Sicilian Vespers in 1282, which destroyed Charles's power. He attempted to negotiate church union with Rome as a diplomatic tool, though this was deeply unpopular with his Orthodox subjects. In Anatolia, Turkish principalities expanded steadily. The Seljuk Sultanate of Rum had fragmented. Various Turkish beyliks, or principalities, occupied former Byzantine territory. One beylik, led by a chieftain named Osman, was growing near Nicaea. This was the beginning of the Ottoman state, though its future dominance was not yet apparent. Michael's son, Andronikos II, ruled from 1282 to 1328. Well-meaning but ineffective, Andronikos faced impossible choices. The empire's finances were exhausted. He reduced the navy to save money, a decision that proved disastrous as Turkish and Italian ships came to dominate Aegean waters. He relied increasingly on foreign mercenaries, including the Catalan Company, a band of Aragonese and Catalan soldiers. When Andronikos could not pay them in 1305, the Catalans ravaged Thrace and Greece for years. The early 14th century saw the empire shrink further. Turkish principalities conquered most of remaining Byzantine Anatolia. The Ottomans, under Osman and his son Orhan, captured Bursa in 1326, making it their capital. By 1330, the Byzantines held only a few coastal cities in Anatolia. Andronikos II was overthrown in 1328 by his grandson, Andronikos III, after a bitter civil war. Andronikos III, ruling from 1328 to 1341, was more energetic than his grandfather. He attempted to restore imperial authority and briefly recovered some territory, but his early death at age 44 ended these efforts. Another civil war followed, this time between John V Palaiologos, Andronikos III's young son, and John VI Cantacuzenos, a powerful nobleman who served as regent and then claimed the throne for himself. The war lasted from 1341 to 1347. Both sides hired foreign allies, including Turks and Serbs. The Serbian Tsar Stefan Dusan expanded Serbian control over Macedonia and northern Greece, proclaiming himself Emperor of the Serbs and Greeks. John VI Cantacuzenos won the civil war and ruled from 1347 to 1354. He invited Ottoman forces to Europe as mercenaries, a decision with catastrophic long-term consequences. The Ottomans, seeing the weakness and division of the Byzantines, established a permanent presence in Europe. In 1354, they seized Gallipoli, giving them a stronghold on the European shore of the Dardanelles. John V Palaiologos eventually reclaimed sole power and ruled with interruptions from 1354 to 1391, but he was essentially powerless against the rising Ottoman Empire. Sultan Murad I, ruling from 1362 to 1389, conquered Adrianople in 1369, making it the Ottoman capital, renamed Edirne. The Ottomans expanded across the Balkans, defeating the Serbs at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, a defeat that entered Serbian national mythology. By 1390, the Byzantine Empire consisted of little more than Constantinople and its immediate surroundings, Thessalonica, the Despotate of Morea in southern Greece, and a few islands. The empire survived only because the Ottomans found it useful as a vassal state, and because they faced other priorities, including conflicts with rival Turkish principalities in Anatolia and the Mongol threat from the east. John V's son, Manuel II Palaiologos, ruled from 1391 to 1425. An intelligent and cultured man, Manuel was also a realist. He knew the empire was doomed without foreign help. He travelled to Western Europe in 1400 to 1403, visiting Italy, France and England, begging for aid against the Ottomans. He was received with honour, but received little concrete help. The empire received a temporary reprieve in 1402 when Sultan Bayezid I, who had besieged Constantinople from 1394 to 1402, was defeated and captured by the Mongol conqueror Timur at the Battle of Ankara. The Ottoman state plunged into civil war among Bayezid's sons. Byzantium gained 2 decades of breathing room, but the respite was temporary. The Ottoman Sultan Murad II, ruling from 1421 to 1451, consolidated Ottoman power. He defeated Hungarian crusaders at the Battle of Varna in 1444. The Byzantine Empire dwindled to just Constantinople and a few Peloponnesian territories. John VIII Palaiologos, ruling from 1425 to 1448, made a desperate attempt to save the empire through church union. At the Council of Florence in 1439, Byzantine and Latin representatives agreed to reunite the churches under papal authority in exchange for Western military aid. But the agreement was deeply unpopular in Constantinople. Many Orthodox Christians, including the influential monk Gennadios Scholarios, rejected union with Rome. The expected Western aid never materialized in sufficient force. Chapter 9. The Fall of Constantinople. By 1450, the Byzantine Empire was a ghost. Constantinople remained a magnificent city with its massive walls, great churches, and imperial traditions, but its population had shrunk to perhaps 50,000, down from several 100,000 in earlier centuries. Large parts of the city lay in ruins. The emperors controlled only the capital, a few towns in Greece, and some islands. In 1451, a new sultan came to power. Mehmed II, later called the Conqueror, was 19 years old, ambitious, intelligent, and determined to take Constantinople. He had briefly ruled as Sultan from 1444 to 1446 before his father Murad II returned to power. Now, with his father dead, Mehmed was Sultan again, and he had a vision. Mehmed understood that Constantinople's symbolic importance exceeded its military or economic value. It was the last vestige of the Roman Empire, the greatest Christian city, a legend. Its conquest would cement his reputation and the Ottoman Empire's status as the dominant power in the region. The Byzantine Emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, ruling from 1449 to 1453, knew what was coming. Constantine, the last Roman emperor, was crowned in Mistras in the Peloponnese in 1449. He never had a coronation in Constantinople. He spent his brief reign preparing for the inevitable siege. Constantine sought help from the west. Pope Nicholas V promised aid if the Byzantines accepted church union. Some Westerners came to help. The Genoese soldier Giovanni Giustiniani arrived with 700 men and took command of the land defences. Venetian ships brought supplies and soldiers, but the help was limited. Western Europe was divided and distracted by internal conflicts. The 100 Years' War between England and France had only recently ended. The full crusading spirit of earlier centuries had faded. In 1452, Mehmed built a fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus, Rumeli Hisara, complementing an earlier fortress on the Asian side. These fortresses cut Constantinople's access to the Black Sea. Ships that did not pay toll or acknowledge Ottoman authority were sunk. Constantinople was isolated. Mehmed assembled an enormous army. Estimates range from 80,000 to 200,000 men, though the lower estimates are more credible. He gathered a powerful artillery train, including massive cannons cast by a Hungarian engineer named Urban. The largest cannon could fire stone balls weighing over 600 kilograms across more than a mile. No walls in the world had been designed to withstand such bombardment. The siege began on April 6, 1453. Mehmed's army encircled Constantinople by land, while an Ottoman fleet of perhaps 300 ships blockaded it by sea. The defenders numbered perhaps 7,000, including civilians who could bear arms. The odds were impossibly long, but the defenders had Constantinople's massive Theodosian walls, built in the 5th century and maintained for 1,000 years. For 6 weeks, the Ottomans bombarded the walls. Urban's great cannon fired repeatedly at the walls near the street Romanus Gate, where the land walls were most vulnerable. The walls cracked and crumbled, but the defenders worked frantically each night to repair the damage with timber and earth. Turkish soldiers attempted to fill the defensive moat and scale the walls, but were repulsed with heavy losses. The Byzantines blocked the entrance to the Golden Horn with a massive chain, preventing Ottoman ships from entering. But on April 22nd, the Ottomans achieved a remarkable feat. They hauled their ships overland on greased logs, bypassing the chain and launching them into the Golden Horn behind the Byzantine defences. This forced the defenders to spread their limited forces more thinly. Inside the city, morale fluctuated. There were omens and portents. A strange light appeared on the Hagia Sophia's dome. A procession carrying a holy icon suffered an accident. People remembered ancient prophecies about Constantinople's fall, but Constantine held firm. He made speeches encouraging the defenders. He personally inspected the walls and fought alongside his soldiers. Mehmed offered terms. If Constantine surrendered, he could leave with his property and the city would be spared. Constantine refused. He would not abandon Constantinople. According to later accounts, he declared he would rather die defending the city. On May 28th, Mehmed announced the final assault would come the next day. That night, a solemn service was held in the Hagia Sophia. Orthodox and Catholic Christians prayed together, setting aside their differences in the face of imminent destruction. Constantine attended, received communion, and asked forgiveness from anyone he had wronged. Then he returned to the walls. In the early hours of May 29th, 1453, the final assault began. Wave after wave of Ottoman soldiers attacked the walls. The Bashi bazouks, irregular troops, attacked first, suffering terrible casualties but exhausting the defenders. Then came the more disciplined regular troops. The bombardment continued, pulverizing the walls. Around dawn, disaster struck the defenders. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander, was seriously wounded and carried from the walls to a ship. His departure caused panic among his men. At nearly the same time, a small gate, the Kirko Porta, was reportedly found unlocked or forced open. Ottoman soldiers poured through. The defence collapsed. Ottoman troops scaled the walls and fought their way into the city. Constantine XI, knowing all was lost, reportedly tore off his imperial regalia and charged into the fighting. He was never seen again. His body was never definitively identified. The last Roman emperor died defending his capital, his death obscured by the chaos of battle. By mid-morning, Ottoman forces controlled Constantinople. Mehmed had promised his soldiers 3 days of plunder, as was customary after a city taken by storm. The Ottomans looted churches, homes, and palaces. They enslaved thousands of civilians. Many treasures of Byzantine civilization were destroyed or scattered. The Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque. but Mehmed also acted to preserve Constantinople. After allowing the traditional 3 days of plunder, he ordered the looting stopped. He appointed a new Orthodox patriarch, ensuring the Greek population had religious leadership. He repopulated the city, bringing in Muslims, Christians, and Jews from across his domains. Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, became the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Chapter 10. The meaning of Byzantium. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, though a few Byzantine holdouts survived briefly. The despotate of Morea fell to the Ottomans by 1460. The Empire of Trebizond survived until 1461 when Mehmed conquered it. A few Aegean islands remained in Byzantine or Venetian hands for decades more. But with Constantinople gone, the Byzantine Empire was truly finished. Over 1100 years had passed since Constantine founded his new Rome. Through all that time, the Byzantines called themselves Romans, Romaioi. They saw themselves as the continuation of the Roman Empire, the guardians of Christian civilization, the heirs of classical antiquity. In many ways, they were right. Byzantium preserved ancient knowledge. Byzantine scholars copied and studied classical Greek texts. Without Byzantine manuscripts, we would have lost many works of Plato, Aristotle, Homer, and other ancient authors. When Byzantine scholars fled to Italy during the 14th and 15th centuries, they brought these texts with them, helping spark the Italian Renaissance. Byzantium developed a distinctive artistic tradition. Byzantine mosaics, icons, and architecture influenced art across the medieval world. The Hagia Sophia inspired Islamic architecture. Byzantine artistic conventions shaped Orthodox Christian art from Greece to Russia. The Virgin Mary with the Christ child, Christ Pantocrator, the gold backgrounds, the stylized figures that we associate with medieval religious art often derive from Byzantine models. Byzantium created a sophisticated bureaucratic state. The themes, the administrative divisions, the tax system, the diplomatic corps, the complex court ceremonies all demonstrated that effective government was possible even in difficult circumstances. Byzantine diplomacy, with its careful manipulation of enemies through subsidies, marriages, and religious conversion, influenced later European statecraft. Byzantium spread Orthodox Christianity. The conversion of the Slavs, including the Bulgarians, Serbs, and Rus, created a cultural commonwealth that endured beyond the empire's political existence. The Russian Empire, and later the Soviet Union, saw themselves in various ways as heirs to Byzantium. The double-headed eagle of the Byzantine Empire became the symbol of imperial Russia. Yet Byzantium also had weaknesses that contributed to its decline. The empire's political system produced capable emperors like Basil II, but also incompetent ones, and encouraged usurpation and civil war. The theological disputes, while reflecting genuine religious concerns, sometimes distracted from practical problems. The economy, though sophisticated, depended heavily on agriculture and trade that could be disrupted. The military, though often effective, was expensive and vulnerable to determined enemies with superior numbers. The relationship with the West was complicated and ultimately tragic. The Great Schism of 1054 formalized the division between Orthodox and Catholic Christianity. The Fourth Crusade's sack of Constantinople in 1204 created wounds that never healed. When Byzantium needed Western help in the 15th century, old grievances and religious differences prevented effective cooperation. Modern historians debate how to characterize Byzantium. Was it truly the Roman Empire continuing, or a different civilization that appropriated Roman identity? Was it primarily Greek, or a multicultural empire? Was it a conservative society focused on preserving the past, or dynamic and innovative? These questions remain contested. What seems clear is that Byzantium was its own civilization, neither simply Roman, nor Greek, nor medieval European, but something distinctive. It combined Roman political ideology, Greek language and culture, Christian theology, and influences from the peoples it ruled or encountered. It was simultaneously conservative in its reverence for tradition and adaptive in its responses to changing circumstances. The legacy of Byzantium endures in unexpected ways. The Orthodox churches of Greece, Russia, Serbia, Bulgaria, and elsewhere continue Byzantine religious traditions. Legal systems influenced by the Corpus Juris Civilis still shape jurisprudence. The idea of the symphony between church and state, that religious and political authority should work in harmony rather than one dominating the other, derives partly from Byzantine theory. Even the word Byzantine, used in English to mean complex, intricate, or devious, reflects Byzantium's reputation for sophisticated diplomacy and court intrigue. For 1100 years, Byzantium stood as a bulwark of Christian civilization against successive waves of invaders. Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, Rus, Normans, Turks, and Mongols all attacked Byzantium at various times. The empire contracted and expanded, won victories and suffered defeats, but endured far longer than most states in history. When it finally fell, it left behind a rich legacy of art, literature, law, and religious tradition. Constantinople's massive walls, built under Theodosius II in the 5th century and repeatedly repaired over the centuries, withstood dozens of sieges before finally falling in 1453. Those walls, still partially standing today, symbolize Byzantium's resilience. For more than a millennium, they protected the city that was the center of Byzantine civilization. The story of Byzantium is a story of survival against odds, of adaptation to changing circumstances, of cultural achievement in difficult times, and ultimately of defeat and fall. It is a human story of emperors and empresses, generals and patriarchs, saints and sinners, victory and disaster, glory and decline. The Byzantine Empire is gone, but its influence continues to shape the world in ways both obvious and subtle. The civilization that began when Constantine founded his new capital on the Bosphorus helped bridge the ancient and medieval worlds and left an indelible mark on European, Mediterranean, and Middle Eastern history. Chapter 11: Daily Life in Byzantium. Before we conclude our journey, let us step away from emperors and battles for a moment and consider what life was actually like for the people of Byzantium. Understanding daily life helps us appreciate the human dimension of this long-lasting civilization. Constantinople itself was a city unlike any other in medieval Christendom. At its peak in the 5th and 6th centuries, the city housed perhaps 500,000 people, making it the largest city in Europe. The city was divided into regions, each with its own character. the imperial palace complex occupied the southeastern promontory, overlooking the Sea of Marmara and the Bosphorus. This wasn't a single building, but a vast complex of halls, churches, gardens, and administrative buildings accumulated over centuries. The Augustion, a large public square, connected the palace to the Hagia Sophia and the Senate House. The Messe, or Middle Street, was the main thoroughfare running from the Augustion westward through the city to the Golden Gate in the land walls. Along the Mise and its branches stood shops, workshops, bathhouses, churches, and mansions of the wealthy. The Mise was lined with porticos providing shade and shelter, decorated with statues and monuments. The city had 14 regions, each administered by an official. There were numerous churches, hundreds of them by some counts, from the magnificent Hagia Sophia to small neighborhood chapels. Monasteries were scattered throughout the city and its suburbs, some wealthy and influential, others small and poor. The monasteries served as centers of learning, charity, and spiritual life. Constantinople's water supply was sophisticated. Multiple aqueducts brought water from distant sources. The water was stored in vast cisterns, some open to the sky, others underground. The Basilica cistern, built under Justinian, could hold 80,000 cubic meters of water. The Romans and Byzantines understood hydraulic engineering, and Constantinople's water system was a marvel. Public bathhouses were common throughout the city. Bathing was both hygienic and social. People would spend hours at the baths, relaxing in pools of different temperatures, exercising, socializing, and conducting business. The baths were divided by gender or had separate hours for men and women. They were heated by hypocaust systems, with furnaces heating air that circulated under raised floors. The hippodrome, built by Constantine and expanded by later emperors, was the center of public entertainment and political life. Chariot races were wildly popular. The racing teams, the blues and greens primarily, had passionate supporters. The factions represented more than sports allegiances. They reflected political, religious, and social divisions. Races could draw crowds of perhaps 50,000 or more. Emperors attended races, showing themselves to the people and demonstrating their generosity through gifts and celebrations. Markets were specialized. There were markets for different goods: spices, silk, leather, metalwork, books, slaves. Guilds controlled many trades, regulating quality, prices, and who could practice each craft. The Book of the Eparch, a 10th century regulation, provides detailed rules for various professions, from goldsmiths to fishmongers. The port was one of the busiest in the Mediterranean world. Ships from across the known world docked at Constantinople's harbours. Grain from Egypt fed the city in earlier centuries, later supplemented or replaced by grain from Thrace and the Black Sea region. Luxury goods from the east, raw materials from the north, and manufactured goods from the empire's own workshops all passed through Constantinople's markets. Byzantine cuisine was diverse. The wealthy enjoyed elaborate meals with multiple courses. Dishes might include fish, game birds, pork, lamb, vegetables, fruits, nuts, honey, and wine. Spices imported from the east flavored many dishes. Bread was the staple food for all classes. The poor subsisted mainly on bread, olive oil, vegetables, and occasionally fish or cheese. Wine was consumed at all levels of society, usually diluted with water. Clothing reflected social status. The very wealthy wore silk, often decorated with elaborate patterns and embroidered with gold thread. The purple dye, known as Tyrian purple, was reserved for imperial use. Commoners wore wool or linen garments. Byzantine fashion was relatively conservative, with long tunics and robes predominating. Men and women both covered their heads in public, women more fully than men. Education varied by class and period. The sons of the wealthy received formal education in classical Greek literature, rhetoric, philosophy, and theology. The university in Constantinople, refounded multiple times, trained scholars and bureaucrats. Monasteries also provided education. Literacy was higher in Byzantium than in most medieval societies, though still limited to a minority. Women of wealthy families sometimes received education, though this was less common than for men. Family life was patriarchal, but women could wield considerable influence, especially through control of dowries and property. Marriages were often arranged, particularly among the aristocracy. Divorce was possible but difficult, requiring imperial or ecclesiastical approval in most cases. Children were valued, with high infant mortality making each child precious. Wealthy families had slaves or servants to help with domestic work. Religious life permeated daily existence. The church calendar structured the year with feasts, fasts, and celebrations. Sundays were days of rest and worship. Major holidays like Easter and Christmas were celebrated with elaborate liturgies and processions. Saints' days were observed. Fasting periods, including Lent before Easter and several other fasts throughout the year, required abstention from meat, dairy, and other foods. Icons were central to Orthodox piety after the end of Iconoclasm. People prayed before icons at home and in churches. Icons of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and various saints were believed to be windows into the divine, channels for prayer and divine blessing. Relics of saints were also venerated, with major relics like fragments of the true cross or bones of martyrs attracting pilgrims. Monasticism was important throughout Byzantine history. Some chose monastic life for religious devotion, others for practical reasons, like avoiding unwanted marriages or political dangers. Monasteries ranged from wealthy institutions with hundreds of monks and vast landholdings to tiny communities in remote locations. Monks and nuns prayed, copied manuscripts, cared for the poor and sick, and served as spiritual advisors. Mount Athos in northern Greece became a major monastic centre with multiple monasteries, a status it retains in modern Greece. In the provinces, life was often simpler. Most people were farmers, working land they might own, rent, or hold in return for military service under the theme system. Villages were the basic unit of rural life. Farmers grew wheat, barley, olives, grapes, vegetables, and fruits. They raised sheep, goats, pigs, cattle, and chickens. The agricultural cycle determined the rhythm of life, with planting in fall or spring, harvesting in summer, and processing the harvest in fall. Rural life was hard. Farmers faced threats from weather, disease, pests, and invaders. Tax collectors were a constant presence, collecting grain, money, and other goods for the state. During wartime, armies might requisition supplies or conscript men. Bandits and raiders threatened isolated areas. Yet rural communities also had their own rhythms and pleasures, festivals and celebrations, marriages and births, the satisfaction of a good harvest. Provincial towns served as administrative, commercial and religious centres. The local bishop was an important figure, often mediating between the populace and imperial authorities. Markets brought goods from the countryside to town and distributed manufactured items and luxury goods. Craftsmen produced pottery, metalwork, textiles, and other goods. Some towns specialized in particular products or controlled trade routes. Byzantine society was hierarchical, but allowed some mobility. The bureaucracy and military provided paths for talented individuals to rise. Education could lead to administrative positions. Military success could bring rewards and status. However, the aristocracy largely perpetuated itself through inheritance, arranged marriages, and control of land and offices. By the later Byzantine period, a relatively small number of aristocratic families dominated the empire's political and economic life. Slavery existed throughout Byzantine history, but was less central to the economy than in classical Rome. Slaves worked as domestic servants, agricultural labourers, and in various crafts. They could be freed, and freedmen could achieve success in business or administration. The church had ambivalent attitudes towards slavery, generally accepting it as an institution while encouraging humane treatment and manumission. The law codes that governed Byzantine society reflected both Roman legal traditions and Christian moral teachings. Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis remained the foundation, but later emperors added new laws responding to changing circumstances. The law distinguished between social classes with different punishments for the same crime depending on the perpetrator's status. Women had some legal rights, including the ability to own property and bring certain legal suits, but were generally subject to male authority of fathers, husbands, or guardians. Crime and punishment in Byzantium could be harsh. Serious crimes might be punished by mutilation, blinding, exile, or death. Blinding was a common punishment for political rivals, as it disqualified someone from holding the throne while avoiding the sin of murder. The practice was widespread enough that there were multiple blinded emperors or would-be emperors. Property crimes might be punished by fines, flogging, or mutilation depending on severity. The church provided some protection, as criminals could seek sanctuary in churches. Medicine in Byzantium combined ancient Greek medical knowledge, particularly the works of Galen and Hippocrates, with practical experience. Byzantine physicians understood the importance of hygiene, diet, and exercise. They used herbal remedies, some of which had real therapeutic value. Surgery was practiced, though without anesthesia beyond alcohol or opium, and with limited understanding of infection. Hospitals, often attached to monasteries, cared for the sick and injured. The Byzantines understood quarantine during plague outbreaks, though they couldn't identify the actual cause of disease. Byzantine contributions to science and mathematics are sometimes overlooked. Byzantine scholars preserved and transmitted ancient scientific works. The university and private scholars studied astronomy, mathematics, and natural philosophy. While Byzantine science didn't match the innovations of the Islamic Golden Age or later Western European Renaissance, it kept ancient knowledge alive through the medieval period. Technology in Byzantium was sophisticated for its era. Greek fire, the secret incendiary weapon used by the Byzantine navy, gave Byzantium a significant military advantage for centuries. Its exact composition remains unknown, as the secret was closely guarded and eventually lost. Silk production, learned from Chinese sources in the 6th century when monks allegedly smuggled silkworm eggs into the empire, became a major Byzantine industry. Byzantine architecture developed the pendentive, allowing domes to be placed on square bases, a crucial innovation seen in the Hagia Sophia. Manufacturing and crafts were important to the Byzantine economy. Constantinople and other major cities produced luxury goods, including silk textiles, gold and silver work, enamels, ivory carvings, and illuminated manuscripts. These goods were exported throughout the Mediterranean and beyond, bringing wealth to the empire. Guilds controlled production, maintaining quality and limiting competition. The state regulated many industries, particularly those related to luxury goods or military supplies. Agriculture remained the foundation of the Byzantine economy throughout its history. The majority of the population were farmers. Wheat, barley, olives, and grapes were the primary crops. Farmers also grew vegetables, fruits, and nuts. Livestock included sheep, goats, cattle, pigs, and chickens. Agricultural productivity varied by region and period, influenced by climate, soil quality, technology, and political stability. Trade connected Byzantium to the wider world. Caravans brought silk and spices from the east along the Silk Road. Ships carried grain, wine, olive oil, and manufactured goods across the Mediterranean. The Black Sea trade brought furs, slaves, and fish from the north. Byzantine merchants competed with Italian, particularly Venetian and Genoese, traders who gradually came to dominate much of the empire's maritime commerce. The Byzantine currency was among the most stable in the medieval world for centuries. The gold nomisma, or solidus, maintained its value and purity from Constantine's time through the 11th century, an extraordinary achievement. The stability of Byzantine currency facilitated trade and demonstrated the empire's economic strength. However, in the 11th century, emperors began debasing the coinage, reducing its gold content. This debasement contributed to economic instability and reflected the empire's declining resources. Byzantine diplomacy was subtle and sophisticated. Rather than relying solely on military force, Byzantine emperors used marriage alliances, subsidies, religious conversion, and careful manipulation of barbarian tribes to maintain security. The imperial court's elaborate ceremonies and protocol impressed foreign envoys and reinforced Byzantine claims to superiority. The emperor was portrayed as God's representative on earth, ruling with divine sanction over all Christians. Foreign rulers who accepted Byzantine titles and honours implicitly acknowledged Byzantine primacy. The bureaucracy that administered the empire was complex and hierarchical. Numerous officials with elaborate titles staffed the imperial administration. The logothetes, or finance ministers, managed different branches of the treasury. The domesticos commanded the theme's armies. The eparch governed Constantinople. The protospatharios, patricios, and other titled officials filled various roles. Corruption was endemic, with officials often using their positions for personal enrichment, but the system generally functioned effectively enough to keep the empire operating. Women in Byzantine society occupied a complex position. Officially subordinate to men, women, nevertheless, could wield significant power and influence. Empresses like Theodora, Irene, and Zoe ruled in their own right or as regents. aristocratic women managed estates and households. Women could own and inherit property, though with some restrictions. Convents provided an alternative to marriage for women seeking religious life or escaping unwanted unions. Women worked as midwives, textile workers, and in various trades, though many professions were restricted to men. Childhood in Byzantium was shaped by high infant mortality. Perhaps 1/3 of children died before age 5. Those who survived childhood might expect to live into their 50s or 60s if they avoided disease, warfare, and accidents. Children of wealthy families received education and training for their future roles. Boys might be groomed for the bureaucracy, military, or church. Girls prepared for marriage and household management. Children of the poor began working at young ages, helping with agricultural or craft labour. Entertainment and leisure varied by class. The wealthy attended the hippodrome, hosted dinner parties, visited bathhouses, and enjoyed hunting. The poor had fewer diversions, but celebrated religious festivals, attended public celebrations, and gathered at taverns. Music was important, with both religious and secular traditions. Instruments included the organ, used in churches and the palace, and various string and wind instruments. Byzantine literature evolved over the empire's long history. Early Byzantine writers continued classical Greek traditions while incorporating Christian themes. Historians like Procopius and Agathias chronicled Justinian's reign. The Secret History by Procopius offered scandalous accounts of the imperial court. Later writers produced chronicles, saints' lives, theological treatises, and poetry. The epic poem, Digenes Acritas, about a border warrior, reflects Byzantine frontier life. Philosophical works, particularly commentaries on ancient philosophers, preserved classical thought. Byzantine poetry ranged from sophisticated court compositions to popular religious hymns. Romanos the melodist in the 6th century composed elaborate hymns called kontakia. The monastic Theodora of Studios produced hymns and spiritual poetry. The secular poetry of court poets celebrated emperors and important events. Popular poetry and songs, less well preserved, provided entertainment and transmitted folklore. Manuscript illumination was a highly developed art. Byzantine manuscripts, particularly religious texts like Gospels and Psalters, featured elaborate decorations, initials, and miniature paintings. The Paris Psalter, the Vienna Dioscorides, and other surviving manuscripts demonstrate the skill of Byzantine scribes and artists. Gold leaf, rich colours derived from minerals and plants, and careful calligraphy made these books precious objects, as well as texts. The preservation and transmission of ancient texts was perhaps Byzantium's most important intellectual contribution. Byzantine scholars collected, copied, and studied ancient Greek literature, philosophy, and science. Without Byzantine efforts, many classical works would have been lost. When Byzantine scholars fled to Italy in the 14th and 15th centuries, they brought their manuscripts and knowledge, providing a crucial impetus to the Italian Renaissance. Byzantine theology was sophisticated and often contentious. Debates about Christ's nature, the relationship between his human and divine aspects, dominated the early centuries. The Iconoclast controversy occupied the 8th and 9th centuries. Later centuries saw debates about mysticism, particularly the Hesychast movement, which emphasized prayer and direct experience of God. Gregory Palamas defended hesychasm in the 14th century, and his teachings were accepted as orthodox doctrine. The relationship between church and state in Byzantium was complex. In theory, the emperor and patriarch worked together in symphony, each supreme in their sphere. In practice, emperors often dominated the church, appointing and deposing patriarchs, convening councils, and enforcing theological decisions. Yet the church also constrained emperors through moral authority and popular support. Patriarchs could resist imperial policies, and monks often championed orthodox positions against imperial interference. Monasteries played multiple roles beyond purely spiritual functions. They served as hospitals, schools, and libraries. They provided refuge for the politically threatened and homes for the elderly. They held significant land and wealth, making them economic powers. Some emperors, particularly iconoclast ones, viewed monasteries with suspicion for their independence and resources. Others patronized monasteries generously, founding new ones and enriching existing ones. Byzantine music, particularly church music, developed distinctive characteristics. The 8-mode system organized melodies. Hymns were sung without instrumental accompaniment, a tradition maintained in Orthodox churches. Notation systems evolved to record melodies, though interpreting Byzantine musical notation remains challenging for modern scholars, the divine liturgy of Street. John Chrysostom, still used in Orthodox churches, was finalized in Byzantine times and represents the culmination of Byzantine liturgical music. As we reach the end of our journey through Byzantine history, from the founding of Constantinople in 330 AD to its fall in 1453, we've covered 11 centuries of human experience. We've seen the empire, at its height under Justinian, nearly destroyed in the 7th century, revived under the Macedonian dynasty, torn apart by the Fourth Crusade, and finally overwhelmed by the Ottomans. We've met emperors wise and foolish, generals brilliant and incompetent, empresses powerful and powerless. We've witnessed great victories and terrible defeats, religious controversies and diplomatic triumphs, cultural flowering and economic collapse. We've seen how a civilization adapted to changing circumstances, losing territories, and transforming from a Mediterranean power into a Balkan and Anatolian state, from a polyglot empire into a primarily Greek kingdom, from the universal Roman Empire into the Byzantine Empire. The rise and fall of civilizations is a slow process, measured in centuries rather than years. Byzantium's story reminds us that even the mightiest empires eventually fall, but also that cultures can endure tremendous challenges and survive for far longer than seems possible. For over 1,000 years, Constantinople stood as the greatest city of Christendom. That it fell does not diminish the achievement of its long survival. As you drift towards sleep, let the long sweep of Byzantine history wash over you. Imagine Constantinople in its glory, the Hagia Sophia's dome seeming to float in golden light, the hippodrome filled with crowds cheering their favourite chariot teams, the great palace with its intricate ceremonies, the markets filled with goods from across the known world. Imagine the provinces stretching from Italy to Armenia, the theme armies defending the frontiers, the monasteries where monks copied ancient manuscripts, the villages where farmers worked the land their ancestors had worked for generations. History is not just dates and battles and emperors, it is countless individual lives, people who loved and feared and hoped and dreamed, who built and destroyed, who created beauty and caused suffering. The Byzantine Empire was all of them, from the emperor in his palace to the farmer in his field, from the patriarch in the Hagia Sophia to the soldier on the frontier, from the merchant in the market to the scholar in the library. Their world is gone, but not forgotten. As long as we study and remember Byzantium, something of that lost civilization remains alive. The buildings they constructed still stand. The texts they copied can still be read. The art they created can still be admired. The laws they codified still influence legal thought. The religious traditions they developed continue in Orthodox Christianity. The story of Byzantium, with all its complexity and contradiction, remains part of our shared human heritage. And now, as the story ends, as the last emperor falls defending his city, as the gates of Constantinople open to the Ottoman conquerors, as 1100 years of Byzantine history draw to a close, let yourself rest. Let the weight of centuries settle over you like a comfortable blanket. Let the long procession of emperors and empires fade into the gentle darkness of sleep. Constantine the first building his new Rome, Justinian restoring the empire and constructing the Hagia Sophia, Heraclius saving the empire from Persians and Avars, Basil the second conquering Bulgaria, Alexios Komnenos navigating the Crusades, Constantine the 11th dying on the walls. All of them are part of the great story of Byzantium. Sleep well, dream of Constantinople. Dream of the Byzantine Empire, that remarkable civilization that bridged ancient and medieval worlds, preserved classical knowledge, spread Orthodox Christianity, and endured for over 1100 years. Its story has ended, but not lost, remembered throughout the centuries, part of the long story of humanity. Good night, and may the history of Byzantium guide you into peaceful rest.